My eyes, I must be dreaming. Wake up.
Oh.
Something's wrong. What now? It's children of a sleep. There's nothing I need. No food. No wish to take a free and share the more instead of only the pure inside that dream. What is the missing in life? Have you found the feeling all around? Everybody falls.
Yeah, I hoped that that's what it was as soon as I saw the GIF, because funny story, every like Christmas morning, that song gets stuck in my head because it's such a perfect encapsulation of how I feel on Christmas morning.
The festive greetings, our legion of elves and reindeer. Welcome to podcast of socially awkward snowmen, crazy stuff, stocking stuffers, and all around naughty list members. Convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Jolly Holly Bookworm, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, everyone. 15 days to go.
And I'm your host slash Santa Claus Burglar, the brings more pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight? Hello, Dragon Turtle. Because I'm not sure what is happening with the intro, but the audio is so fragmented it sounded more horror for a bit there. I have a crappy computer and kind of shitty internet. So I can't really do much about that, to be honest.
Honestly, the more we do this, the more I think I should just get you a new modem at this point.
Yeah, fine. Anyway, let me. Okay. The art of loading. I'm doing pretty well. Set up the Christmas tree today. Yeah, that's how we're doing. Oh, it says well. We're doing well. Mm.
I'm doing reasonably well as well. I'm starting to do all the Christmas shopping for people and so on and so forth. So that always puts me in a good mood.
Mm.
Like I say, when it gets closer to Christmas, I basically do kind of turn into Jack during What Is This? It's very wholesome.
That movie's been around for a while.
Nightmare Before Christmas?
Yeah.
1993, 2 years before I was born.
I'm just it just again, it's just like I assume for you and me, it's been like that movie's just been part of our lives as long as we can remember.
Yeah, because it's such a unique thing, and not to insult Tim Burton or anything, but Henry Selick is the person who probably deserves the most credit for the amazingness that is Nightmare Before Christmas. As much as it's called Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, he didn't actually have much to do with it beyond kind of pitching the original concept. And again, not by no means am I shit talking Tim Burton. I just wish that Henry Selick would get more credit because he is responsible for both Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline. So the man deserves his bona fides.
It's been a while since I've seen Coraline. Like I actually sat down and watched it in school.
I watched it this past year around Halloween because I was originally planning on doing a the fairy lore of Coraline video, but the day came and went, and I was only able to make the nostalgic predict response work.
Mhm.
But something for next year.
Okay. So we are starting off fun. I say that sarcastically.
Speaking of fairy lore, I feel like this article is going to make me lore spurg a bunch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is from Jacobin.com. Originally, obviously, I'm using the archived version. Um, it's published 20 no, yeah, December 24th, 2018. The Class Struggle of the North Pole by editor.
TLDR, you're trying to apply post-Marxist ideology to something that very much exists in an aristocratic and feudal system. So, even in theory, you do not pass go. You do not collect $200. You are the weakest link. Thanks for playing, but fuck off. Anyway, moving on.
Sorry, I'm eating dinner as we're doing this, and I took the most inopportune moment because I thought Dawn was going to talk a little longer. But we're good. We're good now. We're good now.
Mhm.
Um, what's behind Santa's bloody rise? Three leading Elven labor activists offer a class analysis of the North Pole gift economy. What the?
Again, even in theory, you're dealing with the Fae, and and speaking as someone who has worked rather closely with them in my travels around the occult circles here, um, everything with the Fae is about like aristocratic etiquette, hospitality, and transactions. Do not project human motives and human social structures onto the Fae. You will be sadly disappointed, even in theory. These elves are basically seeing Santa, which in this case, let's just drop the pretenses and acknowledge that while Nicholas of Myra has some influence on the idea of Santa Claus as we have it today, more of the Santa lore, if you like, comes from Odin in his guise as the Yule Father, or Gwenavnuth as the Holly King / King of Winter in Welsh mythology, than it does Saint Nicholas. So if we're trying to de-ambiguize this, what you have is an embodiment of the Holly King and/or Odin, and elves serving him basically as a feudal lord or a fairy aristocrat. And once again, do not try to project classism onto something that is very much rooted in a feudal or aristocratic context, because you will fail. Not to mention that you're talking about elves, which in this context are a kind of fae, and everything with the fae is hospitality and transactions. Everything. It's one of the reasons I get along with the ones I get along with as well as I do, it seems.
They
Moving
screw
on.
up. They screw up.
I'm 90% sure that was just Mab trying to get preemptive leverage on me, which, given that she's Mab, I should have not been surprised that that was a thing. And since then, there has been no raking me across the coals, to quote, poor unfortunate souls. So I'm willing to believe this was just Mab basically making sure everything runs in the house's favor, as the old saying goes, because Mab finds leverage. It's what she does. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I'm never gonna let you live it down now, right?
Yes, I'm aware of that, but until such time as I wind up a Dalton sickle in my living room or something, we have no reason to think that she's actually pissed off, because I can almost guarantee you if she was actually that pissed off with me, I would have succumbed to hypothermia many times over by now, and I would be somewhere in the middle of her section of fairy, basically being the human part of a ice sculpture re-rendering of Vlad the Impaler's greatest hits. So until such a time as I wind up staked with icicles underneath a glacier, or am in said, human ice sculpture reenacting Vlad the Impaler's greatest hits, but with icicles instead of wood poles, leave me alone. Things with the Winter Queen and myself seem to be going relatively well, all things considered.
Well,
Yeah, moving on.
This whole labor study group was consulted by yeah, this seems to be just a parody thing. But obviously we're going to take it at face value.
Yeah, they're proposing it as a thing, so satire or not satire, even as a joke, it doesn't work because the premise of the joke is broken. Fairies are still, as far as anyone knows, in a feudal structure, and they would have been in a feudal structure during the time where the Santa Claus mythos was rendered, and Fae, just by their very nature, seemed very hung up on things of hospitality and transaction. So trying to project post-Marxist liberation bullshit onto them is nonsense, even in theory. Moving on.
The North Pole Labor Study Group was constituted by a group of Christmas elves in fall 2008. Santa Claus workshops have been reeling from the global economic recession. The sense of discontent among our ranks was palpable. Since then, we have been using bi-weekly results of concrete analysis of our conditions as workers, as well as debate strategies for resistance. The following is a document submitted to the group in the spirit of deepening our analysis. The Arab Spring and the Occupy movement radicalized many elves, but it is clear that there remains uncertainty about what it will take to challenge the system of exploitation we live under. We believe that the conclusion around political strategy is at least in part a product of a mistaken analysis of the class structure and dynamics of our economic system. What is the true nature of the relationship among elves, Santa Claus, and his reindeer? How were these relations first constituted, and how are they reproduced?
And again, if we're to take this as something resembling a realistic or like anthropologically or lore accurate like system here, you're dealing with elves, which are kind of fae, which are, by their very nature, all about the hospitality and the transaction. Moreover, they always obey what they consider to be obligations of said transaction or said feudal system. Hence, if we take Santa Claus in theory as an embodiment of either Gwenamnoth the Holy King or Odin in his guise as the Yule Father, he obviously has contracted them by means of some kind of obligation. And not for nothing, but as far as we know, the royals among the Fae get their positions by way of accruing power, and they accrue power through things like transactions and or by administering the forces of nature. The cycle of monarchs among the Fae, at least as far as the lore is concerned, seems to be a very meritocratic one. Only those who deserve the crown wear it. So, yeah, no, I can almost guarantee you that any elf that did have a Marxist leaning, for whatever reason, would be a dead elf relatively quickly. Mostly because I'm fairly certain, especially because the longest lasting, Marxist society was in the middle of goddamn Russia. I'm fairly certain that those in power among the Fae would quite handily squash any Marxist leanings, and I would very much hazard a guess that the fairy queens and kings hate Stalin, because in many ways it took the Russian people away from the older folk traditions, which are very, very sort of what you could call Fae-centric. Although maybe not Fae in the Celtic sense, more like the Hulu folk or the light and dark elves from Norse mythology and that kind of thing. But even so, the Russian variety of folktale is some of the oldest and most graphic variety of fairy tales. So I'm gonna hazard a guess, but if I am not mistaken, Mab and Titania, or the entities that are now referred to as Mab and Titania, because that name was adopted by them relatively recently, as in around the time of Shakespeare, relatively recently in terms of scale, the entities which we now refer to as Mab and Titania are probably quite and severely anti-Marxist. I don't want to project politics onto the fairy queens, but given that they had ties and relations to the Russian people and the surrounding Slavic countries for many, 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 many centuries, and Stalin and company came up and overly secularized them and forced atheism down their people's throats. Yeah, I'm gonna hazard a guess that they're not big fans of anything relating to Marx or Marxist theories. Just throwing it out there as long as we're playing the satire game. Moving on.
Alright, alright, I will read that in a second, Grandpa. Give me a sec. In order to answer these questions, we first need to grapple with the dynamics of our supposed gift economy. While it is true that the gifts we produce are not sold, they are governed by more than social norms and customs. One cookie can sustain its waistline, but a manufacturer cannot survive on sugar and flour alone, unless of course he's selling cookies. He still needs money to expand his workshop and purchase new equipment or maintain one of an older vintage.
Okay, I don't want to piss all over this because it's obviously trying to be satire, but they just stepped in it again. Fae have been known on many, many occasions to conjure gold or money or other monetary systems from basically nowhere. It's actually kind of a meme that in folklore circles that Fae gold, you know, s some Fae lord gives you Fae gold, and by the morning it's transfigured itself into like oak leaves or hazel leaves or whatever kind of stuff you can imagine. So literally, you're dealing with a class of being that can, in theory at least, conjure gold from nowhere. And that's even excluding the possibility that because Fae in the classical sense tend to be relatively chthonic in nature, at least to some degree, meaning having relations to the underworld. In the medieval mind, it was thought that spirits like the Fae, or like dragons, or like certain demons, etc., would know where deposits of gold could be found by virtue of basically being earth spirits. In the same way as in the classical Greek period, um, Hades was thought to be a god of wealth because, well, he was the god of the underworld, and most heavy metals, be they gold, silver, platinum, etc., are found in the earth. So obviously, he would know where deposits of XYZ metal material could be found. So whether you're talking about it in the classical, like medieval sense of they know where all the gold is and kind of have a claim to it by its very nature, or you're going with the, they can glamour and conjure gold from literal nowhere if they have to. Not to mention, fake craftsmanship being quite well known for being way, way above human standards of craftsmanship. Um, I really, really don't think that you have any conception of who it is exactly you're talking about. If elves needed money, they could find it or conjure it about as easy as human beings can breathe. Let alone if they really, really desperately needed, real hard, materially existing cash. That's why the system of, favors and debts and oaths and obligations is so crucial to their civilization. If they needed a favor from someone with money, I'm sure they could get someone who had money to be indebted to them for whatever reason and then get them that resource or the money to purchase that resource. If we're playing this to the hilt, if we're playing this as seriously as one could play something as satirical as this is obviously trying to be. Yeah, you're dealing with a class of being that can conjure gold from thin air and or, barter and deal and bargain their way into just about any resource you can imagine. So fail again, I'm afraid. We need to start getting like a Family Feud style like buzzer noise for when these kind of fails happen, because it's one of those moments.
Okay. All right. Central. I'm just imagining them trying to summon and bind a Fae for a struggle session. Bitch, I'm older than your nation. Outliving you will be an afternoon.
Yeah, that does sort of fit.
Not just atheism, uprooting traditions for its own sake, meaning demolishing buildings and relocating people. And that's when you're talking about like Russia and stuff.
Yeah, when Stalin and company came to power, much in the same way as during the French Revolution, they basically viewed any like non-materialist viewpoint or any like folk belief or folk knowledge to be irrational and in some way like toxic to the state or traitorous to the state. Yeah, so I'm going out on a relatively secure limb here and saying that if it could be said that Fae have an opinion on human politics, they're probably not all that big fans of the Hegelian or post-Hegelian wing of philosophy that led to things like Marxism.
Or any element of non-religion. Right. I find it hilarious. Okay. So Hades is in that way.
Well, in the IRL, like actual physical substance sense, I don't know, nor am I going to claim any authority over whether or not he likes a particular kind of music. Something tells me he favors pretty classical music, considering that, Orpheus's lyre music made him and Persephone weep. So if we're to take that story in some way as read, the Greek gods favor the music of the lyre.
I do feel like there is a god out there that is like the patron of heavy metal.
No, it wouldn't surprise me if a god or two favored heavy metal. I'm just not secure enough in, like, I'm not arrogant enough to say yes definitively or no definitively. I'm just going off of the lore and or my own UPG basically.
Shall we see?
Mhm.
Well, everyone knows they currency is children. They're the temporary grandchildren who spoil, grow up, and Satan who never grow up.
Again, even there, unless you want to be very, very how to phrase it, if unless you want to be very, very horrific about it, in most cases, what made a child valuable in the like godparent sense was that fae would have some sway over the life or upbringing of that child, less so the actual, like, they're not, child sacrifice almost never actually historically happened, at least not in the European countries. The Middle East is a slightly different question, and I'm not well versed enough in the history or mythology of those cultures to know what is, propaganda and what is shit that actually happened. But in most cases, child sacrifice to gods or fae was not really a thing that happened. The most that happened was fae would convince children to come away with them and replace the child with a fae child in like the changeling lore. And the jury is still kind of out on whether they did that to spite the parents because the parents had wronged them in some way, or if they were doing it because they felt they could take care of the child better. I'm sure it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, because most things tend to be at least a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I'm not going to say one way or the other. But no, you can find stories of fae barbering for just about anything and everything a chap could unload. Not to mention services. Services were actually, all things considered, probably considered as more valuable than chattels. So generally, services rendered were more valued than capital, to use the modern annoying term. Moving on.
Another. Also.
Brainstormer, like a third of a syllable came out that time. I don't think either of us heard you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think I was just talking to myself, and I think it might be picking up a little bit of it. Okay,
Okay.
I was just trying to figure out if I've already. Okay. Another issue is that our workshops depend on resources not immediately available to us at the North Pole. For a long time, Santa could simply exploit our natural reserves of wood and fossil-based fuel. As new product lines have been introduced, additional materials need to be purchased on a global market. In place of wooden
Again,
toys, we have. I just want to read.
go ahead. Go
You
ahead.
know, in place of wooden toys, we have increasingly had to adopt plastic in order to effectively compete in the Christmas market. This has as much to do with consumer demand as it does unit labor cost. While Santa might want to think he lives in a gift bubble, a growing share of annual Christmas presents has been privatized since the onset of the neoliberal era, made possible by increased price competition with thriving Chinese industry.
Again, when you're dealing with entities that can either barter for or conjure up most resources, this is a farce. Not to mention the one and only good point you could have made, you didn't bother making, which is Fae are traditionally rather vulnerable to iron and silver, and yet a lot of things that they would be manufacturing in theory would contain bits of iron or silver. So you could have actually made a semi decent point about the quote unquote oppression in this circumstance, but you didn't. So I deduct points because not only does your satire that you did make no sense, because it doesn't, also, you failed to hit the one point that you could have actually spun some shit off from. So you are now in the negative values. You have not only failed to gain any points from the actual merits of your satire, you have failed to take into account very obvious and applicable elements that your satire probably should have made a connection with, but didn't.
You know?
Moving on.
All right. But competition has not led Santa to necessarily increase the productivity of each worker. Instead, he has been able to drive down unit cost of production by more aggressively sweating the labor he already employed, or by simply adding more workers to reduce the time that the workshop is left idle. As long as he has surplus elf labor to draw on, as he certainly still does, he cannot be much concerned with the health and safety grievances we have filed with him.
Okay, and once again, I must poo-poo this concept just on its own merits, because here's the thing. The elves we're dealing with in terms of like the Santa style elf are probably more closely related to house spirits like the brownie, the kobold, the envoy, and the hob. So that being the case, one, as long as their work is compensated in terms that they prefer, brownies and other forms of like, you know, diminutive house spirits actually tend to favor this kind of work. Um, and in many cases, you're not allowed to compensate them in ways that you might compensate a human being. There's the famous, you you pay a brownie in food and occasional other luxuries, but if you try to pay them in clothes, they will take it as an insult and bugger off forever. Um, so if we are taking this at something resembling again lore accuracy or anthropological accuracy, there are many ways in which elves wouldn't want to be paid, at least not in the way that humans would, and would take it as an insult if someone tried to. Add to that the fact that we're talking about a group of elves that in theory work for an embodiment of either Gwyneth Nud or Odin, and we're probably dealing with something approximating like Spark elves at most, like Ethri and so on. And they do craftsmanship they do craftsmanship largely because that is their nature and that is what they prefer to do. And if we're taking Santa in this context as an embodiment of either Gwyneth Nud or Odin, they're working for him to to pay an obligation or some kind of debt that they owe him. So yeah. I refuse to project any more modern day classist bullshit because you failed to acknowledge that even in the hypothetical ranges of your satire, you don't know your subject matter. And bad satire is what you get when you try to satirize something that you don't have any idea what you're talking about with. You have to actually know your subject matter reasonably well to accurately satirize it. And as we just covered, I would probably be able to write a better satire of this type than you do, because, again, the thing with a lot of elves or fey creatures having an issue with iron and silver, you could have done something like that with regards to my working conditions or my material labor, yada yada. But you didn't, because you forgot that elves are, even in theory, different from freaking humans. Moving on.
More gratitude only gets the businessman so far. Santa, as sole proprietor, is able to keep his finances secret. Those who have had the misfortune to work in his office have reported that letters from the Vatican and Washington have regularly arrived days before his quarterly plans for production. They can surmise that financial support from these sources, along with their yearly estimates of nice children, are what actually sustains our economy. It is through these external funds that Santa is able to provide the candy and shelter for which we must exchange our labor power. And how this people come to hold power over us, what is through greater ingenuity? Was it through greater ingenuity or was it something more sinister?
Okay, a lot of this, you know, the oppressions of labor bullshit doesn't really apply either, because elves are, at least in the like nominal sense, non-physical, and they only become physical as and when they need to accomplish something or something. They only become something approximating physicality when they need to interact with physical things. So they wouldn't have a lot of the physical exhaustion issues of a human labor force. Again, we're dealing with largely spiritual entities here, even in theory. So again, it's like you didn't even bother to. And here's the thing. Again, you could actually make a meaningful satire of this if somehow you were able to make the argument that Santa, in theory, hadn't been keeping up his end of the bargain. Which, again, given that it's either Gwenamud or Odin in most contexts, I very highly doubt that. And in no way am I insinuating that. By the way, in case any concerned entities happen to catch wind of what I just said, I am playing within the rules of the satire. But even then, that would have required you to put aside your Marxist bullshit for all of 5 seconds and read something other than Das Kapital or The Conquest of Bread or whatever the fuck. Hell, you could have even called this article The Conquest of Gingerbread if you really honestly wanted to have a decent sense of humor about this. But because, one, a large vein in the Marxist framework is anti-non-materialism, and therefore you have to ignore or outright undermine anything that's a non-physical or metaphysical belief. Two, because these kind of Marxists generally believe that the only correct worldview is Marxism, they don't value any input that comes from anything else, and or they see it as hostile to the movement somehow. But if you're going to play the satire card, if you're going to play these kind of games, don't then be surprised if you end up losing the game that you yourself started because you didn't do even hypothetical research. Moving on.
Alright, the rise of Santa Claus. You must remember that Santa started his life as a petty commodity producer of wooden toys. He had been a master craftsman of wood, trained by some for the best elves and most powerful yet, while others had been content to exchange the wooden commodities in local markets. Santa began selling his in nearby towns. As luck would have it, the clergy in some industrial towns he visited saw in these sacred commodities the scarce commodities, the means to engender moral discipline in the increasing numbers of children that flooded their streets in the lower classes.
Again, you're trying to, like, this happened in the totally not satirical article that we did last week, so I'm not even allowing you to pull the satire card on this one. You once again are doing the thing where you're looking at something that exists in a pre-capitalist structure, for lack of a better word, in a feudal or aristocratic structure, and then completely pretending like the feudal or aristocratic structure doesn't exist. So, yeah, no. The elven class, which in this case again is something approximating like house spirits like brownies and domvoys and those kind of things. The elven class is not a lower class in like Marxian terms. They are underlings largely because they have not yet accrued enough power to themselves to rise up the ranks, as it were, as far as we know. Again, I can't say that with any kind of certainty, but if we're playing within the like anthropological or war accuracy grounds, and I see no reason why we shouldn't, then false. Also, fake craftsmen are very, very well respected in their respective fields. It's one of the reasons why leprechauns are associated with having a pot of gold, because the leprechaun is traditionally a cobbler among the Fae. They specialize in what we in modern terms would refer to as like haberdashery, and they get paid extremely well for doing the same. That's why some of the earliest versions of the leprechaun wear red, the color of a craftsman, and usually are depicted wearing a leather apron in the earliest traditions, because leather aprons were a commonplace thing for someone who worked with leather goods like shoes. Moving on.
Largely raised funds from rich patrons as well as the middling classes. Generally compensates Santa for delivering wooden toys as gifts to a select group of children. As urban populations expanded and the problems facing the ruling class worsened, Santa became overwhelmed by the increased demand for his handmade toys. He initially sought to expand production by exploiting his own family, but he soon had to look for surplus labor elsewhere. But try as he might with stories of servants impoverished and distant, and he could not compel the necessary numbers among us to labor in his workshop.
again, we're either talking about a guise of Odin as the Yule Father, or we're talking about Gwynedd as the Holly King / Winter King. And that being the case, he has plenty enough power to both within himself do basically whatever the fuck he wants, and or get people who owe him favors to do it, which has always been the insinuation with the relationship between Santa and his elves. They are craftsmen who work for him, probably, again, along the lines of the way that the Aesir in Norse mythology would occasionally contract out work to the elves or the Spart elves, aka the dwarves. And if we're dealing with the like Victorian notion of the house fairy in terms of elves, instead, like, whether we're dealing with the high she, the high lords of the elves, or we're dealing with the diminutive brownies, hobbs, etc., you're dealing with beings who have a tremendous amount of power within their respective fields, and in most cases enjoy the jobs that they do and are paid by laws of hospitality or obligation, more so than they are paid in a wage. There is no reason whatever to assume that the elves are a bunch of wages. In fact, again, if you go by the older lore, you had to be very careful in how you paid a brownie or a house sprite, because if you paid them in the wrong way, they would take it as an insult and book it from that place. Moving on.
Okay. Finally, after a failed experiment with a putting out system, Santa resorted to violence as the only means by which he could coerce us into his employ. This would not have been possible without the support of the clergy and rising bourgeoisie in the town. With their help, Claus organized an underclass of reindeers who have historically had tense relations with elves, while promising them economic assistance for society.
Where in all of the realms of all of the mythologies of the world are you getting the idea that Santa keeps the elves in line with force? Again, if we're dealing with the like elves and the shoemaker brownie style elves, that shit doesn't work on them and will easily make them vamoose. If we're dealing with the high lords and ladies of fairy, they wouldn't be doing this kind of work at all, because they have craftsmen to do that shit for them. That's why, again, leprechauns are, in the classical sense, as well paid as they are, and why they would have a pot of gold, because they are craftsmen, and craftsmen are highly respected in this kind of quasi-feudal aristocratic system. Hence, I don't know where you're getting the idea that Santa was using force on the elves, but I'm going to have to borrow a phrase from Dr. Christy Winters here and say, citation needed. Because nowhere in any mythology that I am yet aware of is it implied that Santa uses force to keep the elves in line in any way whatsoever. And there is a crap ton of lore that would suggest that if such a thing had to happen, or did happen, the elves would simply start being mischievous little pricks and bugger off. Moving on.
Right, gangs of reindeer were sent out to elf villages to tear up farmland, which they were well suited for given their antlers. The constant disruption of food production left many of our people with no choice but to deal. All while the ruling class in town to fabricate a story to counter the reports of violence in the hinterlands that made their way to the cities. Owing to the gifts he bestowed on the children of the town, they likened Santa to Bishop Nicholas of Can you know? No,
Myra.
Myra.
It's a small like province or village in what is now Turkey, what was then called Asia Minor. Which again, I don't want to be overly pedantic here, but most of the Santa lore as we have it now comes mostly from pre-existing polytheistic traditions in the form of Odin in his guise as the Yule Father, or Gwen Abnud as in his guise as the Holly King / Winter King. Like, I'm not saying that Saint Nicholas had nothing to do with the modern idea of Santa, but as far as we can tell, the ratio stands at like 40% Odin, 30% Gwen Abnud, and like 20% 20% Nicholas of Myra. And you can tell because in most artistic depictions of Santa, he's a white guy. And Nicholas of Myra, as far as we know, again, was the Bishop of Myra, a village in Asia Minor, or what is now Turkey. So he would be Turkish. If we were straight going with the Nicholas of Myra portion of Santa. But again, we have no reason to because most of the lore that surrounds Santa comes more from either Odin or Gwen Abnud / the Holly King. Anyway, moving on.
What is Asia Major then for a long time?
I'm not sure exactly where the border was between Asia Minor and Asia Major. I want to say that included places like what is now China or Japan or Thailand and places like that. Asia Minor was the countries that was what is now the countries between the Middle East and the Mediterranean, or the quote-unquote Pillars of Hercules. So like Turkey, Morocco, like some parts of what is now Romania, somewhere in that general region. But yeah, most people agree that the majority of Asia Minor was probably in what is now Turkey, which is why if we were going with Nicholas of Myra as the origin of Santa Claus, Santa would probably be Turkish. But he isn't, because neither Gwen Abnud or Odin were considered Turkish. Moving on.
After a while, the Roman class in the towns had fabricated a story to counter the. I stopped in the middle of that. Counter the reports of violence in the hinterland. Made their way to the cities, pointing to the gifts to be bestowed on the children of the town. They likened them to Bishop Nicholas of Samara, a rich man who was known to be generous to children, and depicted the reindeer as noble creatures. But Santa is no saint, and the reindeer are no friends to us.
Okay, I get that in most. Go ahead.
Santa violently reconstructed the old class structure in his narrow interest. He separated from a primary subsistence through the coercive threat of antlers, a strategy he has had to maintain this stay in order to his class position.
Again, no. One, the idea of the sleigh being pulled by reindeer is once again something borrowed more from Odin than from Nicholas. because obviously reindeer don't exist in what is now Turkey, nor did they, several hundred years ago when Nicholas of Myra would have been a flesh and blood living being. The idea of the Yule Father's sleigh being pulled by reindeer is something borrowed from the Yule Father, which is one of the many guises of Odin during the Yule period. But I get that the reindeer can talk in most pop culture iterations, but they are, for all intents and purposes, animals, and I've never known even the zanier of the zany Marxist or neo-Hegelians don't consider animals to be part of the bourgeoisie. I'm sure there are some out there, because for God's sake, during the Soviet Union period, several Soviet quote-unquote scientists and philosophers viewed certain plants as part of the bourgeoisie, for God's sake. So it's not impossible that you could view animals as part of the bourgeoisie or part of the oppressor class, but it's reaching even by Marxist or neo-Hegelian standards. Also, Dragon Turtle, Santa is actually less likely to be black than Cleopatra was. Moving on.
Understanding the different class interests in our society is essential if we're going to develop an effective strategy of resisting our exploitation. Armed with such an analysis, we can explain to our brothers and sisters why recent statements about a few bad apples among the reindeer ring hollow. They remain our enemies and adversaries as long as they serve as bulwark of power in our society.
Again, if we're talking about elves in the Victorian or slightly before Victorian sense of brownies and house spirits and the like, you literally damn near can't oppress them because they would not put up with it. And power structures such as they are, even in this hypothetical, would be along the lines of a feudal lord and his craftsmen, or an aristocrat and his craftsmen. So, again, fail. Yes. And yeah, I know, Dragon Turtle, I know. That's why I said it's not entirely out of the question according to these assholes, but it would be reaching to say that the reindeer are part of the bourgeois class, even in this metaphor.
Class analysis also challenges the dominant narrative we say about why Christmas elves are so willing to work for leaders' compensation. We did not enter his workshop because we have innate dispositions that better fit production of toys, nor did farms because we prefer candy to tubers. This is a crucial point. Popular lore about it is that we gladly work for candy, but that was not by choice. Before the reindeer devastated our family plots, we cultivated a diverse range of vegetables more suited to the surrounding land. We were even recognized worldwide as experts at storing harvest in the warmer months for consumption year-round. All that has now been lost. Our dependence on imported sugar is a result of social conditions beyond our control, and in this sense we have much more in the team field than we do with the exploiter who benefits off our blood, sweat.
And again, this satire would work if you had done 5 seconds of research, because unlike humans, as far as the lore is concerned, elves actually love and thrive off of things like sweets, honey, and milk. So this is not in any way oppressive or a cultivated thing. Elves have always been, especially the brownie style craftsman elves, have always been known to favor sweets. and fat and luxury. Basically, what I'm saying is if like Santa de facto existed in the way we're describing here, elves are the one workforce in all of hypothetical existence that you probably could get to work for you forever with the appropriate, offerings of like milk and cream and sugar and sweets and candy and shit. So yeah, no, this is not some cultivated dependence. They have been known to favor the best and the sweetest of, human crops basically as far back as anyone can know, and that includes several centuries worth of oral tradition before anything was even fucking written down. So yeah, no, I call bullshit. You actually could, in theory, bribe, especially something equivalent to brownies or something equivalent to hobs, with sweets and cream and milk and sugar, and they would be as right as rain, pretty much. As far as we know, going based on like lore accuracy and so on. Moving on.
Alright, some have concluded that the old slogan, "Workers of the world unite," is far too outdated for the new post-industrial reality. They have said that the working class is no longer the agent of social transformation, but this conclusion, we believe, ignores the conditions that continue to prevail in Santa's workshop and beyond. We hope that the above clarifies some of what we see as crucial for correct analysis of classes in the North Pole. Let the war on Christmas recommence on a more scientific basis.
Again, the level of just childish ideological projection here is like, I know it's supposed to be a satire and it's supposed to be silly and shit, but even within the grounds of hypothetical nonsense here, like, this goes against every ounce of lore in every culture that has something equivalent to a fae or something equivalent to like a house spirit, like whether you're talking the Greek concept of the genus loci, or you're talking the Scottish and Welsh definition of a brownie, or you're talking about the um like Scandinavian concept of a kobold or a domovoi. Like the quintessential error they're making here is they're treating elves as though they are de facto indistinguishable from human beings. And it just ain't so. No culture has ever viewed them that way. And even in most like commercialized or secularized contexts, we still don't view them that way. Like unless you're going straight up Santa Inc., which you should never go full Santa Inc. It is a bad, bad, bad idea. There is absolutely no way to go about this and make this make any kind of sense whatsoever. Fairies are, by their very nature, in a feudal or aristocratic framework wherein they are wherein they are basically paid in terms of like honor and hospitality and shite, and they favor their respective crafts. In fact, it's crueler to prevent a brownie or a domovoi or a kobold or something equivalent to that from doing the things um, that they are good at than it is to have them do it on the regular. And if they're doing it for Santa, who in this context is basically either Odin or Granadnoth, then this is just craftsmen doing their work for a liege lord, as is well documented among basically every kind of like fairy folklore, whether you're talking about the Aoshi of the Tuatha Tag, or whether you're talking about the Hoodoo folk, or whether you're talking about the dark elves and light elves of Norse mythology, or whether you're again talking about the genus Locis or like daimons from Greek mythology. Like, no matter which way you slice this, none of it makes sense, and every ounce of it is just we wanted to take like Christmas folklore and remake it in our ideological image. Well, no. Even in the realm of this being a hypothetical, you still should be obliged, especially because you're all supposed to be so much about, the sanctity of the authoritative study and the glory of the social sciences and this and that and the other and material conditions. The fact that you didn't take even a folklorist or a anthropological stab at some level of lore accuracy here kind of just pisses me off. And I'm pretty sure that if any Fae could be persuaded to give a shit about this, which probably not, but if they could, um, they would also be pissed off. Moving on.
Okay. I have a question for Dalton, because I have no fucking idea.
Yes, in the Greek conception, especially during like the times of Alexandria, the genus loci or the house spirit um functioned in a similar manner to the brownie or the, like, for lack of a better word, house elf concept that would happen in like the Anglosphere later on.
Mm.
That's why you really needed to make regular offerings to your genus loci to keep it happy, and thereby keep your household also happy, because a pissed off genus loci could make your life a living hell in a similar manner to how a Bargurt does, or how a Frederick does in like European folklore.
All right, so this is originally from Truthout. Truthout.org. Tidings of discomfort and joy, Christmas as resistance. This is written by Amanda Ubis Kessler, published December 25th, 2022.
Dragon Turtle, usually the like household chores that a brownie or like that kind of being was associated with did often include farm work. In fact, there are many stories of, especially in Scotland and Wales, brownies or the equivalent being a farmhand as part of their household work. As for writing and similar, there is precedent for fairies inspiring artists and poets and shit. In fact, it's one of the things they love doing. So that also counts. As far as the not safe for work stuff, that is a different kind of fairy altogether, thankfully, because otherwise I would have to contemplate the idea of being raped by a house spirit, which just no thank you. Not at all. No thanks. But there is precedent for like the fairy seductor or the fairy seductress, like the Gon Kana or the Lian Shi or the fairy lover concept is what is well known. It's just not usually the same kind of fairy that does that as does the sort of household chores and craftsmanship shit. It varied. There are descriptions in the Greek magical papyri for cultivating and making offerings to a genus loci. Um, Very often you would have the members of the household be visited in dreams by the genus loci and basically telling them what it wanted. So it varied from household to household and from family to family. Although it did usually run similar to the like brownies offerings, and similar like offerings of cream, offerings of honey, offerings of sweet wine, um, offerings of especially during speaking of the precedence to Christmas, like Saturnalia festivals, you'd often get small little um small little, I guess you could call them an antecedent to sugar plums. They were called globi. They were basically these sort of uh, dried fruit type candies that you would give to servants, to the poor, and to the genus loci of a given location. Not to mention the genuses of like crossroads and rivers and roads and waters and things. Basically, again, there was a much softer break between animism and polytheism than there was between animism and monotheism. So, in a lot of ways, you did have the idea of a local god in like the Greco-Roman period, especially. That's why, for example, the crossroads were considered sacred and were considered to be like thresholds between realms, because you'd have the spirit of one road and the spirit of another, basically having kind of a mutual neutral territory around the crossroad, which would usually be under the aegis of Hecate, if we're going by the like Greco-Roman standards. Hecate, one of Hecate's main roles was as a goddess of crossroads in the Greco-Roman period. That's one of the ways in which she was a goddess of witchcraft. She was a goddess of ways and of crossroads, both crossroads between two different roads, but also crossroads between realms like the living and the dead, etc., and so on, because there was a lot of crossover there in their conception of things, anyway. Anyway, moving on. I could go detail spurting on the lore and history of these kind of tutelary spirits forever, because it's one of my kind of semi-autistic areas of special magical interest. But
so let me read everything I said like you down. Yeah, let me start over then. So this brings me from truthout.org. Tidings of Discomfort and Joy, Christmas as Resistance, written by Amanda Edith Kessler, published December 25th, 2022.
Mm-hmm.
All right, okay. I thought you had more. All right. Christmas offers an opportunity for those who celebrate it to recommit to the love and solidarity its story teaches.
Okay, I'm going to be at least a little bit kinder here, because there is precedent for the like Yuletide or the Saturnalia period being like the time when essentially class dynamics got reversed and we paid special attention to the poor, the homeless, the servant class, and of course the slave class. So there is at least some very loose, very stretched ways in which this is somewhat permissible. But as always, I maintain these traditions belong to no one, at least no one among us humans, because they are so universal and um so ubiquitously predate anything we can define as civilization that it wouldn't surprise me if you could find Homo erectuses or Neanderthals doing the very, very earliest precursors to these traditions. So I will give you at least some credit, because the idea of the master-slave relationship being somehow inverted, or this being a time when masters should pamper and sort of pay back their slaves for all the work they do, is something that at least goes back as far as Saturnalia and went all the way up through the medieval period and into the Victorian times. So there is some precedent here for this kind of, I'm gonna hate myself in the morning, class consciousness with regards to Yuletide traditions. However, that doesn't mean it needs to be social justice, and it doesn't mean that it should be Marxist. If anything, it means that it should definitely not be those things, because Marx and Engels had everything backwards, as did Hegel before them, as did Rousseau before. Actually, I can't remember if Rousseau was a contemporary of Hegel's or if Rousseau was before Hegel. I want to say that Rousseau was before Hegel, but don't quote me. Moving on.
Okay. Did you know that? Oh, no. That's for the article. Never mind. Alright, what would happen if everyone who celebrates Christmas in the U.S. agreed to get the presents, the stockings, and the parties, and instead use the day to act on the actual message of the Christmas story? For Christians in the U.S., December 20. Oh, one of these articles.
Oh God, it's
You didn't check this when you sent it, did you?
is this a twofer? Are we getting the Christian version of social justice? Oh my God.
Okay. All right. Let me restart that. Christians in the U.S., December 25th is widely described as a holiday of comfort and joy. But if those of us who celebrate this holiday actually sit with the Christmas story that we're supposed to be celebrating, we may find ourselves thrown into a deep and productive discomfort. A commitment to accept the risk and messiness of acting in solidarity with those who face the most structural violence in this country, and acting in resistance to all that impedes justice and human flourishing. What?
Well, I'll be damned. I think we have a twofer. I think we have traditionalist Christians trying to claim Aegis over the holiday, and the same people also falling victim to social justice. I would say it's impressive that you've managed to fall off two totalitarian fuckwit edges at once, but at this point, I'm basically just looking on. I'm looking on in horrified fascination, in the same way as I would if, say, like a clown car ran into a cream pie truck or something. That's where I'm at. It's both hilarious and terrifying all at once. I can't look away. Christian social justice. This is how far we have dug, folks.
Okay. Did you have anything to say like the first thing?
Well, obviously, again, I don't like traditionalism or social justice, so I would say a hard pass to all of the above. But again, I'm just I'm looking on in horrified fascination as to how someone could manage to pretzelize their brain into doing both at once. Like, I'm used to dealing with traditionalist fuckwits, and I'm used to dealing with social justice nonsense. I think this might be the first time we've ever had a twofer where someone was trying to square the circle of how do we fit extremely traditionalist Christianity and social justice together. It's like looking into the abyss of everything that I fear and hate. Oh my God.
Uh, People in the U.S. rarely see Christmas in this way is a testimony to the extent to which Christmas has been domesticated. It's not because U.S. Christians focus on the nativity story to the exclusion of Jesus' ministry. These stories have their own radical sensibilities. For example, Mary's Magnificat imagines a world in which the winners and the losers change positions. What would that change look like in our society today? This is not a question most U.S. Christians ask at Christmas because we are too busy focusing on materialism and individual pleasure.
because not to be an asshole or anything, but that's the fun bit. Um, the bit that actually comes from an older tradition of like polytheistic and then eventually animistic like traditions. And Dragon Turtle. Just to be, I know you're being, I know you're being cheeky, but just so anyone who's Christian watching this can put their mind at ease, I am not by any means opposed to Christianity in general. But the highly traditionalistic, highly capital F, capital V family values Christianity, the kind that does basically the Helen Lovejoy thing of appropriate all morality as though it must be Christian morality, that kind of shit. That is what I'm
I'm not
opposed to. I'm not opposed to
I'm,
Christianity in general, and in many ways you could argue that that kind of shit isn't even what Jesus meant when he did his thing. So I'm not being anti-Christian in general. I'm specifically against the authoritarian, moralistic, censorious and um, co-opting version of Christianity. Just like I'm not necessarily opposed to all social movements, I'm opposed to the ones that are authoritarian, censorious, and all the rest of moralistic on that side too. Which is why it's kind of fascinating and horrifying all at the same time that someone somewhere appears to have managed to fall off both edges of stupid at once.
anything else? Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Given the challenges of life in a society that worships money, rewards the few, and punishes everyone else, the desire for a holiday of comfort and joy is understandable. But Christmas has an untapped potential to shake up Christian communities if reimagined as an invitation to embark on the same work Jesus did, not a time and place.
Oh God, this is that Jesus was actually a Marxist shit, isn't it?
Hold on.
God, I
Okay,
hate
let's
it's.
continue because I don't have no fucking idea where this is going.
There's a strain of like extremely leftist Christianity that basically claims that Jesus was a like anarcho communist or anarcho Marxist. It's completely wrong if you actually read the goddamn text, but there is a strain of like extremely left wing Christians that try to square the circle of being a Christian while also basically advocating for Marxism.
If we think of Jesus as a miracle worker, a great teacher, a philosopher, or as God in the flesh, then that's one of the main things we know of a person. He was a member of an oppressed and exploited community and organized them to resist their Roman oppressors. He did this by offering an alternative understanding of reality that helped the oppressed and exploited know themselves, people living in God, and they were greater, more compassionate.
Okay, my brain. It's just I'm looking at
I mean,
I'm looking at.
okay, I'm gonna
Go
say this.
ahead.
I say it not entirely agreeing with them, but they're not wrong about because he was Jewish.
Yes, but okay. I'm going to have to. I'm going to just have to bite the bullet and wade into the shark infested waters, aren't I? Okay. Here's the thing.
But hold on, I
Go ahead. Sorry.
do think they're wrong because they're positioning that as honestly, it's this weird thing that they're saying something, but I don't think they're saying anything at all.
Again, on the one hand, I'm going to have to translate this into sane human being, which is going to be a task in and of itself. and then I'm going to have to wade into the shark-infested waters thereafter. Okay, so here's the thing. The reason why this is inherently FUBAR is because, like I said, there is a certain sector of Christianity and a certain sector of, for lack of a better word, like leftism or critical theory or like academic social justice nonsense that frames Jesus as though he were a Marxist. And the short answer is that's not true if you read the actual Bible. The slightly longer answer is the part where I'm gonna have to end up pissing some people off and just wade into the shark-infested waters anyway. As far as we can tell, if you take things like the Apocrypha and the Gnostic traditions into account, the Jesus that actually probably existed, the kind of Christianity which he espoused was probably closer to the Gnostic understanding of Christianity, the sort of semi-mystical understanding of Christianity, than it is the standard, like, traditional post-Peter Christianity. Because the earliest documents we have of Christ actually predate the current canonical Bible and suggest that Jesus basically viewed physical reality itself as a prison and was attempting to give his followers the capacity to transcend physicality. He basically viewed the entirety of physical reality as a prison in and of itself. That's why he eschewed that's why when you look at especially the more mystical strains of Christianity, which also happen to be the earliest as far as we know, there's a lot of crossover between Christianity as it probably originally was and should be practiced and Buddhism. However, that does not in any context mean that Jesus was an oppressed minority or that he was advocating for the proletariat. Again, the only way you could think that is if you were illiterate not only of the extra-canonical material, which again, as far as we know, has a better and more solid historical pedigree than even the canonical Bible does, but also ignorant of the actual canonical Bible. Because whether you're looking at the extra-canonical material that probably predates the canonical material by several centuries, or you're just looking at the canonical Bible, while Jesus was opposed to the excessive accumulation of wealth or the abusing of people on the basis of accumulating wealth, he was not necessarily opposed to the accumulation of wealth ipso facto. And moreover, if we're to go based on what Jesus said, be it canonical or extra canonical, I believe it's Mark 6 verses 5 and 6, which basically says something to the effect of, and I can't quote the verse directly, pity not the person who shows their piety publicly, for they have already been given the reward that is due them, but instead do your prayers in the privacy of your own home and don't make a public spectacle of it. Which basically means that Jesus, again, if we're to take either the extra canonical material or the canonical material at its word, was opposed to what we in the modern day refer to as virtue signaling, but in the olden day was referred to as proselytism, which is, of course, completely and utterly counter to most of the organized religion of Christianity. Which again is far more closely associated with a kind of Jewish version of Buddhism than it is modern day Christianity or modern day social justice. Because whether you're a social justice warrior or you're a highly traditionalistic authoritarian Christian, proselytism and morally shaming people is basically your entire MO. And Jesus was opposed to such things. In the extra canonical material, he even alludes to in greater detail, you weren't supposed to proselytize and preach to people. You were supposed to live as a good example for people, and they would be convinced by your goodness to follow your beliefs rather than proselytism. Anyway, moving on. And again, I apologize if I pissed off any Christians in the audience. It's just, again, I realize I'm wading into shark-infested waters here, but I have to call it as I see it, and as I see it, both in terms of the historical record and in terms of the actual, I'm going to hate myself for using this word, but praxis of Christianity that is espoused both in the canonical Bible and in the extra canonical material. Christianity was far more esoteric than it is exoteric, and as such is more in line with the Gnostic version of Christianity, or again, kind of a Jewish iteration of Buddhism, than it is to modern day organized religion. Moving on.
Okay. At the heart of this resistance was Jesus' understanding of the kingdom of God and kingdom of heaven. We do not live in an era of kingdoms, but Jesus did, and the kingdom he imagined was in direct contrast with the kingdom of Caesar. In Jesus' day, Caesar's kingdom was physically violent, politically oppressive, economically exploitive, and spiritually dehumanizing. God's kingdom, as Jesus experienced it, was nonviolent, politically liberating, economically just, and radically humanizing. Jesus worked to co-create this kingdom by tending to the sick, feeding the hungry, sharing his ideas, eating with anyone and everyone who would join him, in resistance to the status hierarchies of dining in first century Judea, and offering hope and guidance to the divided and oppressed.
Actually, to be fair, the only time Jesus actually gets genuinely pissed off with the Jewish hierarchy, such as it is when he finds money changers in the temple, because he didn't believe that spirituality should be treated like a business, and even if it were business, it shouldn't be crooked business. He never straight up condemns wealth in and of itself. He condemns the corrupting nature of wealth, if anything. He condemns the way certain people choose to use their wealth. But he's all for appreciating the bounty of the world such as it is. So I refuse to read Christianity as proto-Marxist. You could get away with Gnostic or proto-Buddhist, but you could not get away with Marxist. If anything, if Jesus hated wealth, it was likely because it was an extension of the physical world and of the attachments that the soul had there too. And again, if we're to look at Jesus not only in the canonical Bible, but also in the extra-canonical material, which again predates the canonical stuff by a good solid several centuries in most cases, Jesus viewed anything that attached oneself to the physical world as a negative in a similar fashion to the way Buddha did. But he didn't view opulence or wealth as a bad thing in and of itself, because he was very well versed in the Old Testament and referenced things like Job and how his success was a result of his piety rather than the other way around. If anything, he was basically advocating for live as spiritually as you can, and if you do it well, good things will happen to you. which again sounds vaguely like karma or vaguely like the Gnostic sort of understanding of Christianity. But I'm not going to draw any further parallels than that, other than to say that, again, Christianity as it probably originally existed was probably more esoteric than it was exoteric. He seemed to view the personal relationship with God and the personal relationship with the spiritual to be a person's own personal concern rather than something that should be officiated by a priest or a church. Moving on.
All right. Love for Jesus was at the heart of the Holy Domain. Love of God, self, neighbor, and love of enemy. Love meant treating others as one who would wish to be treated. Love involves compassion and kindness even toward enemies, but love was not primarily a matter of feelings. It required making decisions, serving God and save wealth, for example, and taking radical action to help those most in need. He seems to have seen himself as a prophet in the lineage of Isaiah, bringing good news to the poor, release to the captives, and freedom to the oppressed. Rome and the Jewish leadership in Jerusalem both burdened the Jews of Judea, and Jesus' actions addressed both types of burden. In one story of Jesus casting out a demon, the demon refers to itself as legion, term for a Roman military unit, and was expelled into 2000 pigs, most unclean animal according to Jewish understanding at the time. Who drowned in the sea, surely Romans go home message if there ever was one. While in Jerusalem, Jesus interrupted the business of money changers outside the central Jewish place of worship, thereby challenging a practice that was economically exploited to the poor Jews.
Again, in the case of Jesus versus the moneylenders, it was definitely more a corruptive and attaching force that he was upset with rather than a hatred of money for its own sake. And since you pulled out the demoniac story, let me, because this is one of those areas where, being a magical practitioner, I'm well versed in. The reason why the demoniac or the being inside the demoniac referred to itself as Legion was not because Rome bad, it was because they were many. Quote, I am Legion, for we are many. It was basically a unit of I am so numerous that this is the closest approximation of counting that I can give you. And even then, in the context of exorcism, Jesus specifically refers to himself being part of the lineage of Solomon because there was a situation in, I want to say, Gospel of Mark, but someone more well read in the Bible, please correct me if I'm wrong. There is a moment where he's performing an exorcism, and he refers to himself as one greater than Solomon, which is significant in this context because Solomon was definitely in the more mystical and, in some sense, Kabbalistic schools of thought, more so than the exoteric ones, which suggests, again, that Jesus, if we take either the canonical Bible or the extra-canonical material as read, saw himself more as a prophet and a mystic than he did some kind of judge or lawgiver. He specifically mentions people like Solomon because it seems like that is the tradition of biblical figures in which he considers himself to be following in the footsteps of. And Solomon was, of course, one of the key figures in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, because, of course, the famous thing of he was visited by the angel. In some contexts, it's Gabriel, but in older and I consider more reliable contexts, it's usually Raziel, because Raziel is the angel of divine secrets and divine wisdom, and also is usually associated with as an angel of magic. He's given a ring with which he controls 72, some versions jinn, some versions demons, and it is considered part of his role as being the wisest man to ever live that he understands both the medicinal but also the magical properties of animals, plants, stones, etc. So if we are to take Jesus at his word in this context, he again frames himself more as a mystical figure than he does necessarily as a king or lawgiver. Yahweh occasionally refers to himself as the King of Kings, but Jesus most often, when he is referring to himself, refers to himself as the Son of Man. And like I say, in that one instance, when he engaged in an exorcism, he refers to himself as one greater than Solomon. But all that means is that you can't look at this in Marxist classic oppressor-oppressed terms. You have to look at it in a Kabbalistic or Gnostic sense, because the Gnostic sense of Christianity predates the exoteric organized religion part of it by a good number of centuries. And again, when we see, even in the canonical Bible, Jesus making connections between himself and other biblical figures, he tends to favor the more mystical ones rather than the givers of the law, and so on, moving forward.
Okay. Jesus also expected his followers to show their love of God and neighbor by taking care of the poor and those in need, and went so far as to suggest that when nations, not individuals, but societies, take care of the poor and those in need, they are tending to Jesus himself, while nations that fail the poor and those in need are failing Jesus. This last point returns us to our own time and place, where a society fails the poor and those in need on a regular basis. Our society is a physically violent, politically oppressive, economically exploitive, and spiritually dehumanizing as Roman Judea was. Even if the details are dramatically different.
I hate to be the asshole here, but by what metrics are we talking about? Because if we're talking about like Judaic Rome, our society is orders of magnitude more prosperous than even Rome at the height of its power could have dreamed of being. Which isn't to say that Rome was this, oppressive, domineering patriarchy that the social justice types want to make it out to be. Rome was, in its time, probably the most humane civilization on the planet. Up until the point where its imperial corruption got the better of it, at which point movements like Jesus's led eventually to its collapse. But even then, as screwed up as our modern day civilization might be, if I had the choice between living now and living as a peasant during, Judaic period Rome, I would take now. That doesn't mean we shouldn't improve civilization or that we can't make it function better. That's why I'm a men's rights advocate and a social democrat, for example. But please don't try to tell me that we have made no progress since Judaic fricking Rome as a civilization. It is very, very badly untrue, sir or madam. I don't know who wrote this article, but God, it's trying to combine my two least favorite things: authoritarian moralistic Christianity and like critical theorist Marxist social justice. And it's actually like staring into a Lovecraftian horror to see these two things working to get like someone try to bind these two things together. Because now I used to view traditionalism and social justice to be basically two competing varieties of authoritarian moralism. But articles like this suggest to me that we might get the worst of all worlds, in which you would get the worst of authoritarian moralistic traditionalist Christianity and the worst of social justice combined. Dear God, please no, I don't want that. Moving on.
Okay. For example, we do not live in a kingdom, so the idea of the kingdom of God may not have the same instant resonance of spiritual and political resistance today that it did when Jesus proposed it. Other terms have been offered, such as Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community, theologian Ada Maria Izasi Diaz's kingdom of God, or the terms I offered use love's domain and love's realm. Pastor Friend uses the term the economy of God, which might also be rendered the polity and economy of love for those who do not find traditional God language helpful.
But okay. See, this is a problem of trying to square the circle of extremely authoritarian traditionalist Christianity and like neo-Hegelian social justice. God's kingdom is referred to specifically as a kingdom. You can't just selectively edit that out because you don't like it. You can if you're me and don't really see any need to interact with the Abrahamic God under most circumstances, and therefore I don't have to care. But if you are claiming to be any of the Abrahamic religions, and therefore subject to the Abrahamic covenant, I'm sorry, but you don't get a vote. God's kingdom is a kingdom, and no amount of weaseling out of it will weasel you out of it. Like whether you're going in the context of the Abrahamic religions themselves, or you're even going back a little bit further to the time when like Babylon and Sumeria and Canaan and similar countries were basically finding themselves in a situation where they had polytheistic equivalents to Yahweh, like El or Yahovah or any of the other names he goes by. No, it's definitely still in a kingdom format. Unless you think that God abdicated and created some kind of divine parliament at some point, which, I mean, if you look at it in the like pre-Abrahamic polytheistic context of places like Babylon and Sumeria and Canaan and similar, there is a context in which Yahweh or El could just be the highest god among a pantheon of gods. But even then, he still refers to himself as the highest of that pantheon of gods. So even then, you're dealing with some kind of monarchical system or feudalistic system, and you can't just go, ew, I don't like the language of kingdom, when you're trying to simultaneously be a social justice warrior and a Christian of a very, very myopically authoritarian stripe. Again, I am by no means condemning or shaming all Christians here. There are plenty of Christians that I can get along with just fine, and would have no problem with me criticizing this. But since you, writer of this article, are trying to square that circle of neo-Hegelian critical theory and extremely devout fundamentalist Christianity, no, you can go fuck yourself. Either God's kingdom is a kingdom in the very literal sense, or you are being blasphemous. Pick one. Moving on.
I discuss Christmas offers an opportunity for those who celebrate it to take up our own part in resisting the powers that be and birthing an alternative vision of society. We can reject economic violence and political oppression and work toward a society in which everyone has the same access to power in all its forms, political, social, and economic. We can
What you're describing. Go ahead.
Hold on. Two more sentences.
Sorry.
We can reject exploitation and work to reimagine and then change how resources are developed and shared. We can reject dehumanization and seek to encounter all people, even our enemies, as fully human.
See, but here's the problem. What you're basically describing there, and I'm not making this up, but what you're basically describing there is anarcho-communism or anarcho-syndicalism, which is Antifa's party line. And I hate to burst this particular bubble, but most of the political violence that is coming in this day and age is coming from the exact same people who espouse something equivalent to anarcho-communism or anarcho-syndicalism. Because while you in theory love your neighbors as yourselves, as Jesus said you should, when your neighbor happens to hold a different ideology from you, whether you're talking about from a Christian perspective or from a like neo-Hegelian post-Marxist perspective, you get very, very, very irate. This is why there was an Inquisition, because while you should in theory love your neighbor as yourself, and kudos to anyone that genuinely tries to do that, by the way, very often you define humanity as morally valid within our paradigm, and so anyone who espouses a different paradigm automatically gets chucked into the morally invalid sinner is not really fully human category. And then you wind up in a very apocalyptic scenario where, since you believe that society is corrupt and needs to be radically changed using your own words, then it makes perfect sense for you to violently beat up all the sinners because they're getting in the way of your post-apocalyptic utopia. Literally. That's the one thing extremely fundamentalist Christianity and social justice have in common. They both believe that the world is fallen and broken and shitty, and that they need to usually apocalyptically oppose society until it can be turned into a post-apocalyptic utopia. And wouldn't you go right ahead and know it? That's the one thing about extremely fundamentalist Christianity and social justice that I very deeply fear and hate, because I don't think utopianism is healthy, not even in the spiritual sense. Moving on.
The practices of resistance into Christmas, we must reject materialism in favor of generosity and compassion, and frame the holiday around communal labor in solidarity with those who face oppression of all kinds. In practices, especially taken up broadly, would move our society closer to justice and to an opportunity for all people to flourish.
What about the oppression of people who you don't consider morally valid? Like, I am kind of taking the piss a little bit here, but I'm also seriously pointing this out. This is the problem with this oppressor-oppressed mindset. Because you set the term, because you are the one who defines what you mean by oppressor and oppressed, anyone who you don't consider morally valid automatically gets shoved into the oppressor box. And what do we do with oppressors? We overthrow them, we belittle them, we often are violent to them in extreme cases, and we generally try to equalize the civilization by treating the oppressors in exactly the same way that we theorize they treat everyone else. But what you end up with in such a situation is you end up with someone who is hypothetically an oppressor being actually oppressed by actual people in the name of equalizing a system that they came up with in their own fucking heads by their own definitions and their own frameworks. Which is why you very obviously need to make sure that your hypothetical suppositions are accurate before you engage in anything like this kind of action. Because if you call a person who is not an oppressor, then you will wind up oppressing them in the name of equalizing oppression that may or may not actually exist. Which, if you oppress someone who is not an oppressor in the name of equalizing oppression, you will, ironically, wind up oppressing them. And therefore you will wind up being the oppressor. See, this is also a problem that happened historically. When Rome was persecuting Christians and Jews, that obviously wasn't correct. However, later in Rome's history, when the Emperor Constantine changed the state religion of Rome to Christianity, very often the same feed 'em to the lions attitude that befell the Jews and Christians would later befall the polytheistic Romans who didn't feel like converting. And all this change is which blood is currently staining the stone floor of the Colosseum. It did not change the moral worth of those people. It's why the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy is a false one. Or rather, I guess I should say it's one of the many reasons why oppressors and oppressed dichotomies can be viewed as a false one. Because if you are wrong about being oppressed, or you're wrong about who's doing the oppressing, you might wind up in the oppressor category simply by virtue of being wrong and being so cocksure of your own correctness that you will not even countenance the idea that you are wrong. Which is why this kind of radical action is usually something considered to be a last resort. Because if it is your first port of call when engaging in political action, you will wind up bloodying the streets with the blood of people who you think are oppressors but probably aren't. Moving on.
Okay. We're almost done. So.
Mm-hmm.
The communal labor of solidarity could take many forms. Those who celebrate Christmas could deliver water for migrants on the U.S. side of the southern border. Christians who are not targeted by racism in this society to put our bodies on the line at protests against racist police/vigilante violence. We all could join striking workers on picket lines, or we could participate in vigils and other actions against mass incarceration, and particularly against execution, remembering that the person whose birth Christmas celebrates died of state-based capital punishment.
I don't mean to be an asshole, but Christmas is in a lot of ways Christian in name only, because a lot of the traditions that we actually associate with it come from older traditions, specifically polytheistic or animistic ones. So, in most cases, you're dealing with a festival that is like 30% commercial, 40% polytheistic or animistic in origin, and whatever's left of being Christian. So, like, also you're using Jesus as a political football to legitimize your very obvious like neo-Hegelian critical theorist or Marxist leanings. And yeah, no, Jesus wasn't a Marxist. He was a hippie, like Gnostic or Kabbalistic mystic. If we're going both based on things in the canonical Bible and things arguably older than the canonical Bible that is a lot closer in time to when Jesus actually would have been alive, which is groups like the Essenes and the Cathars and the Gnostics. Jesus is a lot closer to a Buddhist with like Kabbalistic or Gnostic leanings than he is to a Christian in like the Roman Catholic or Protestant sense. And either way, whether you look solely at the canonical Bible or at the pre-existing extra-canonical material, Jesus wasn't in favor of public displays of proselytism. He wanted your personal relationship with God to be your personal relationship with God. And if he viewed wealth as bad, he viewed wealth as bad because it was an attachment to the physical world, which he viewed as inherently fallen or inherently corrupt or inherently sinful. And much like the Gnostics or Essenes or Cathars, advocated people embrace spirituality in spite of physicality rather than being weighted down by the physical world, which in and of itself is not, strictly speaking, anti-wealth or anti-capitalism. No matter how much you desperately want to square the circle of Christianity and Marxism, they don't go together. And the kind of authoritarian moralistic Christianity you're espousing probably isn't a good thing in and of itself, much less so when you throw, neo-Hegelian critical theory and social justice in alongside it. Like, the only thing worse than traditionalistic totalitarian Christianity is traditionalistic, moralistic authoritarian Christianity that also incorporates aspects of neo-Hegelian social justice. Like, I didn't think you could find a way to combine them, and while I'm morbidly impressed that you did, it's still like a philosophical car crash, and I'm only looking away because I'm simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Or, like, I'm only unable to look away because I'm simultaneously horrified and fascinated at the same time. Because it's like you took the two worst halves of two animals and you combined them. And now some horrifying eldritch chimera is walking down the street, and I can't look away because it's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. Moving on.
There are a wide range of ways to develop such practices of resistance individually among our families, social networks, in political movements, and in religious studies. What all of these approaches have in common is a dramatic change from our emphasis on comfort to a commitment to discomfort in search of solidarity and resistance. Make Christmas an opportunity for resistance, so to celebrate it, you need to move from comfort and joy to discomfort and joy.
No, I don't think we will be doing that. I not only would it be a bad idea if we did, it would probably destroy a lot of good things. And the one thing extremely fundamentalist Christianity has in common with, quasi-Marxist neo-Hegelian bullshit is they both would work in theory in a subsistence living kind of sense, but they do not create luxury. They do not create surplus. They do not create excess. And therefore, they don't actually create anything of a positive integer. They might, in some very broad sense, diminish negative integers, but neither Marxism nor extremely fundamentalist Christianity will create positive integers. In order for that to happen, you need pluralism, you need secularism, you need capitalism of some description, and you, unfortunately, for the sake of all utopians everywhere, you do need something resembling a state to function. I'm sorry, anarchists, but we are hierarchy and pattern-seeking creatures. If you take the state away from a group of humans, They will just create something new approximating a state eventually. We can hope for minarchism and we can hope for social democracy, but we cannot hope to abolish the state ever. It is not going to happen unless you go back to like before the nation state was created in the first place in like a agrarian farming community. But I don't want all of humanity to live like the Amish or the freaking Unabomber, so I would advocate we don't do that. The wonders of the modern world come from positive integers. They come from excess. They come from surplus. And we can't have either of those with either extremely fundamentalist Christianity or social justice. And we certainly can't have either of those in a world where those two things have been welded together, like some horrifying chimera. Moving on.
The discomfort of working to bring a just society into being is not joyless. There is joy in community, joy in labor, joy in hope, joy in struggling less, or in watching people who have struggled to find new keys. There is joy in the new gifts that people can offer around them when they finally have what they need and are treated with respect. If they want December 25th to become what it never has been, the most wonderful time of the year, then our work is for us. May all who celebrate Christmas choose to take it up.
No, I don't think we will do that because that is literally what people like Stalin and Lenin said. The good citizen of the People's Republic is allowed to take joy in praxis, but if you find joy in literally anything else than practice or suffering on the behalf of the people, then you are a counterintuitive, dangerous, reactionary, subversive. So no, I don't think we will do that. I don't think we will turn one of the actually most joyous times of year into a reason to morally flagellate and whip ourselves constantly until we've arrived at some hellish utopia. Because whether the Christianity wins out in that scenario or the social justice wins out in that scenario, no matter who wins in that duology, we all lose. Like we've seen what extremely fundamentalist religion turns countries into. Look at the Muslim theocracies. And we've seen what extremely fundamentalist social justice or neo-Hegelianism turns countries into. Look at the Soviet Union. Do you want to combine those two things? Because I don't want to combine those two things. I don't want to live in a theocracy where the only diversion from theocracy is serving the will of the people, quote unquote. That actually sounds like literal hell on earth to me. It sounds like you literally could not make a worse definition of hell if you tried, barring some kind of Warhammer-style intervention of some chaos god somewhere. Like, and even then, I would almost prefer like Slaanesh or Tzeentch to what that would inevitably entail. It's
So, it's one of those articles. I think it's one of those articles that says a lot, but really says nothing at all. It's just talking the talk. Because I didn't really get anything at all from it.
No, it's extremely specific, extremely academic nonsense. You have to both be well versed in like neo-Hegelian critical theory, and you have to be well versed in extremely fundamentalist Christianity to get anything out of that article. And if you are well versed in those things and are opposed to those things, like I say, it's like watching my two least favorite things in the world make some kind of Eldritch Abomination baby. And it's fascinating in its horrifyingness, but I really would rather it not exist.
Yeah, but that was the end of it. Right on to the videos, which I provided this week.
Yay, we've gotten through the things that are going to make Dalton drink by the end of the show, probably.
So this is Christmas Demolition by Tom Scott. If anyone remembers that guy, we did the Secret Santa video he did last week.
Mm-hmm.
We found to be a riot.
Mm-hmm.
I believe this is an older one than that. Yeah, this came out 10 years ago.
Candy canes.
Give me 1 second. Get full screen. I got mute, so candy cane. Okay, muting right now. I don't really have anything to say at the moment. I just appreciate the production value, and this is a YouTuber from 10 years ago. How does it look far better than a goddamn movie these days? Fuck.
Yeah, no, we really have fallen because the only actually artistically inclined people can't get hired because they're the unmentionables for some reason.
Either that or just they're there actually is like some YouTubers who talk about like getting into the business that are filmmakers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone remembers Rocket Jump, Freddie Wong talked about this. There's this stigma with like YouTube creators that are filmmakers as well.
Yeah, they don't like independent voices because the artistic landscape of Hollywood, like so many other things, is basically a overly normative establishment at this point.
It's not even that. It's that they think YouTube is for kids. That it's not something actually worth something.
Yeah, like I said, they have a deep, unabiding hatred for anything outside of the approved channels. Whether it's because it's for kids or whether it's because, ooh, those nasty people who I don't like are part of YouTube. It doesn't really make much of a difference. All it ultimately ends up with is they're outside of our Overton window. They're outside of what we deem to be acceptable within the establishment. Therefore, nothing could possibly be meaningful in their creative endeavors.
I mean, some have gotten lucky. Some YouTubers have gotten lucky and gone into something. Like, well, the one I can remember the most is I can't remember his YouTube name, but the guy who directed the Shazam movie.
David F. Sandberg.
Yes. Yeah, he was a YouTuber before. Like, he did short films on YouTube.
Well, good for him.
Even now,
I actually like that franchise even better now. I didn't realize he was a YouTuber before he hit big.
Yeah.
But YouTube solidarity, my friend.
Yeah, he still does videos on there. Like, he even did some stuff that talked about like behind the scenes stuff for Shazam. So
The Shazam franchise just got more based. Yay.
okay. Anyway, mute and game.
Candy canes.
It's nothing!
Okay, someone please explain to me what just happened, because like I don't understand exactly what just went down in the flashback.
Oh, he didn't give him anything for Christmas, and now he wants revenge. I told you. I thought it was Cole at first, but apparently not.
Okay, so this guy basically has the same backstory as that one police officer in Merry Christmas, Drake and Josh. Actually, a lot of Christmas-oriented villains have that backstory of um, Christmas was traumatic and tragic for me, so now I hate it and I'm gonna destroy it.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Like the only person who doesn't, the only like traditional Christmas villain that doesn't have that backstory is Cousin Mel from Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, and
Well,
she dislikes it because it's not commercial enough and she can't make a profit off of it. She doesn't like the, to use her words, the goody goody feelings of Christmas.
I was also gonna. I don't know if this counts, but Pitch Black from Rise of the Guardians.
Well, yeah, but in fairness, he's like an eldritch force who feeds on like fear and pain and shit. So he's excused. He can feel that way. Um
But that is a good movie. I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean to
yeah,
sound
no, Rise of the Guardians is awesome.
like I saw that in theaters when it came out.
I wish it had sequels. It really deserved sequels, because there was like, it was almost like a like holiday themed fairy tale version of the Avengers, and I wanted to see more adventures of them, and I wanted to know more of the world building, because the whole, like, they're all blessed by the like moon spirit or whatever
Man
is
in
a
the
really interesting concept. Yeah. And I wanted, like, there probably is some older lore behind that, and I wanted them to explore it. But when
apparently there are books that it's like based off of book series, but from when I've been able to find like in the reviews of the book series and stuff, the books are really weird and very different from the movie.
huh, interesting. But yeah,
Like,
they should have made more Guardians movies, and they
because
only
apparently Pitch, um, he is like a fallen hero. That's like one of the things I remember most from those reviews.
huh, interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to find those videos and send them to you, Don. I think you get a kick out of them.
That, yeah, that's very fascinating. Of course, the portion of my brain that just devours lore is just like, interesting lore, gives it to me now. Like,
Although I think the video is like an hour or so long, or maybe more.
mm,
I'll have to find it. I'll send it to you when I can.
well, I like longer videos. Deep dives are very better than videos that are too short. Anyway, candy canes.
I prefer a middle ground, not too long. Like I've seen like 7 hour videos that go into lore.
I've I don't think I've ever seen a 7 hour. Yeah, like 7 or 8 hours might be too long, but then again, I wouldn't mind watching a video like that. I just don't think I could do it in one sitting. It would have to be like 2 or 3 hours
Yeah, that's fair.
at a time at that point.
I would have like again, like for me, it's like a playlist. Most half an hour long, like 30 minutes. Okay, can't say anything. So you-
This reminds me vaguely of, and this is the weirdest connection I think I've ever made. Do you remember the scene from Batman Returns, or yeah, Batman Returns, where uh Selina has a nervous breakdown and like she's stuffing stuffed animals down the garbage disposal and stuff? I don't know why, but that's what this made me think of.
I will admit the fight. Well, I appreciate the hard work, and it is clearly the actor himself doing the stunt work. It is
Mhm.
fairly basic, but I appreciate the effort.
Well, this was done in what, 2013, you said? Because 10 years?
Yeah,
This is roughly the kind of stuff that you'd see like the original like Channel Awesome guys like Linkara doing. So I mean the production values are slightly better than that, but like yeah, this is the kind of like I think this might have even been post the Nostalgia Critic Revival when he incorporated the demo reel style segments into the reviews proper. So yeah, it, it's a time capsule from like 2013. Moving on.
again, the effort is realized and acknowledged.
Yeah, no, the production values are good.
Yeah.
Certainly by 2013 YouTube standards.
Although to be fair, I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe it might have been last year, but the Grinch versus Santa Claus fight scene short film.
Hmm.
I really don't think anything can top that in terms of Christmas action on YouTube.
I mean, I'm sure something could, but yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Super Santa Saiyan thing was really hilarious.
I gotta watch that again. I gotta make it like a list of things to watch on YouTube for like Christmas and stuff.
Hmm. But candy canes. Imagine if they had taken like this premise and done like imagine this, but it's the violent or yeah, the Violent Night Santa.
I mean, I kind of did that with John Leguizamo's character at the end of the movie, but like a full-on movie about like a guy trying to get Santa.
Assassinate that Santa, yeah.
Yeah. Now I actually want to see that. um,
I still maintain that they should do a sequel of that, which is basically Santa versus Krampus.
because I mean, if that Santa is like a badass, imagine what Krampus is like.
Yeah, if Santa in that universe is that badass, and mind you, the Santa that we saw in Violent Night is struggling with his powers, so in the sequel, presumably he would have, his full powers. So like a fully powered version of that Santa going up against Krampus in that universe would be cool. Talk about like a DBZ style fight or a giant chicken from Family Guy fight, but live action.
Yeah, they stopped doing those. Like they have Peter and the chicken somewhat reconcile.
Yeah, I know. I miss the chicken fights.
Just because most of the time in the early seasons they were really random, right? Like you never knew when they were coming.
Yeah, and like they would always go increasingly more and more over the top.
Yeah. All right.
Candy canes.
Yeah, if it came out in 2013, that would have been a year before John Wick.
Correct.
I'm just action. Again, I'm seeing some things here. Like, it's not, again, while it is clearly low budget in terms of action, there is a lot of actually interesting stuff put into it.
It's a YouTube skit, but clear amounts of effort were put into it, so
Yeah.
I can't hate it. Yeah.
No.
But candy canes.
And to be fair, again, you and I are in kind of that generation where we grew up with like shows that didn't have like big budgets, but still did put a lot of effort and work.
So much. See, that's the thing. You would think that with the budgets going up, that you could get more out of it, and if they put in the actual effort, you could. But they seem to just have forgotten how to make the most of their budget and put most of their budget on screen, which is just sad.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, candy canes. Again, I'm getting like AVGN or like Nostalgia Critic vibes from this, and I enjoy it. I could see a situation where like the Angry Video Game Nerd or the Nostalgia Critic would go like this on set. It would be funny. Of course, it wouldn't be the critic though, because in the Channel Awesome like lore, there's a being called Santa Christ, and he and the critic get along really well, so he probably wouldn't go this hard against Santa. Also, the Nostalgia Critic has a disproportionate love for Christmas in general, but I could see the AVGN going like if somebody sent him a like really bad Christmas themed game, I could see him like putting out a hit on Santa and basically doing this. But
Yeah, I got nothing. So.
yeah, candy canes. Oh my god. Like, it's very obviously like Adobe After Effects, but damn.
Yeah. But again, I think it's fairly obvious how much fun they were having doing all this.
Oh yeah. Again, it puts me in mind of the best like Nostalgia Critic or Channel Awesome style fight scenes, and yes, those had fight scenes
I think,
sometimes.
okay, well, it could be just because of our ages, but I was certainly thinking like Corridor, Digital, Rocket Jump. Though those guys were also like did really great visual effects and are like legit filmmakers.
Hmm. The Channel Awesome stuff always had a more like independent like movie feel to them, and thus looked a little cheap. But honestly, that was sometimes part of the charm. And towards like 2012, 2013 era, there was a massive like spike in their production values, because that was around the time that like Linkara would start using the green screen regularly to do things with Comic-Con 1. And the Nostalgia Critic, I think this would have been post-revival, so he would have started rolling in demo reel style segments into the Nostalgia Critic reviews. Because, like, when specifically in 2013 was this? Like, when was the video released?
Okay, hold on.
Because 2013 was the year I started college.
God, you're old.
Shush. You will someday be this old too, or I will end up getting the necromancy. Either you will live this long, or I will make you live this long by way of necromancy.
Okay, so I was wrong. It was okay. So it did say 10 years, but it's actually December 22nd, 2012. 2012.
Okay, so this would have been around the time of To Boldly Flee, and somewhere in the vicinity of the, I think the missing number entity storyline from Linkara would have been finished by then. It would have been on to, I want to say, King of Worms by then. So before Atop the Fourth Wall, the movie. And yeah, I want to say it would have been between To Boldly Flee, which was 2012, and the relaunch of the Nostalgia Critic, which was in 2013. So I want to say the Entity arc would have been done by then, and we would have been in King of Worms territory, I think. Sorry, my reference point for like YouTube or online culture at that time period was definitely Channel Awesome, because my college roommate got me heavily into Channel Awesome. So I'm trying to frame this in my head in terms of like the visual effects style and stuff. This would have been probably either just before or just after To Boldly Flee, which was the third Nostalgia Critic movie, or the third That Guy with the Glasses Channel Awesome movie, I should say. Moving on, though.
Right. Okay.
Candy canes.
Christmas pun.
Okay, that was very, very like classic. That guy with the glasses style humor. I approve of that. I approve of that very mightily. Christmas pun. That actually takes me back to Suburban Nights, which is probably the best of the that guy with the glasses movies.
I'm trying to think what would work. It could work.
Your hall just got decked.
That's it, worthy. I get it. I was trying to think deck the halls too, but
Damn it, there aren't any good puns off the top of my head.
oh ho ho, motherfucker.
No, that doesn't work either. Because that one doesn't really make sense in context anyway.
Fair enough.
Honestly, speaking of Christmas related material that's very action oriented, you could just go, you could just steal it from Die Hard and go yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. Because as everyone who knows about the yearly discourse about Die Hard knows, there's a large percentage of people who think that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. I am not among them.
I mean, I get both sides, but
Like it takes place during Christmas, but there's nothing particularly Christmassy about it, or nothing particularly Christmassy in the context of the movie. So the fact that it takes place on Christmas is mostly immaterial to me. And yes, I'm aware that an entire half of the internet is now gunning for my head, but oh well. I think I'm getting a cold. I hope I don't have a cold on Christmas. Suck.
Alright.
Candy canes. I doubt it, Dragon Turtle, because she is just now getting caught up. According to the Christmas Eve short story, she's just now getting caught up with the whole "Let It Go" phenomena. So I very much doubt that Sarissa showed that to her. And I don't think IRL Mab particularly cares one way or the other. I think she would probably paraphrase Book Mab and go, that's in the category of mortal popular nonsense. Because it's not like it references her or her court or anything, so I doubt she cares. I think honestly Gremlins is more arguably a Christmas movie than Die Hard, because there's that extremely disturbing bit with the father dying in the chimney trying to surprise his kids. Ouch.
Last thing tonight. I saw this about a month ago or so. The official trailer for Dashing Through the Snow, which is on Disney Plus, and it already came out, but I don't have Disney Plus. So.
Yeah, I don't know if we still have Disney Plus or not. I don't think so. Anyway, candy canes.
Um, but
Well, hello, baby girl. How are you today?
So good. It's Christmas Eve.
Oh, yeah, that.
Your child loves Christmas. Just have fun.
Oh, Christmas tree. Oh, Christmas tree.
Dad, is that nice?
You sound like wounded ducks. And what was that?
Okay, it's gonna be one of those Scrooge type character learns to love the holiday sort of things, I think.
yeah, which I mean, it's fine as long.
I mean,
You
if it
know,
ain't broke, don't fix it. And like 90% of all Christmas material, like period, features the, atypical curmudgeon getting their just desserts for not liking the holiday thing. Whether
yeah,
it's A Christmas Carol or whether it's Grinch or,
I
any of the
mean,
above.
to be fair, there are only like a few different styles of Christmas stories. Like archetypal wise, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's
There's
some
the,
very,
yeah.
but overall, there are specific story plot beats that are very common throughout every Christmas movie or story.
Yeah, there's the Scrooge learns his lesson kind of stories, which you can also kind of throw the Grinch into.
Mhm.
There's the person wants Christmas every day and has to learn the lesson of its magic is at its best when it's limited to its specific time, a la Christmas Every Day from the Fairly Odd Parents, or I think there
Uh,
was even a story with Huey, Dewey, and Louie wishing for Christmas every day as well.
there's
Um,
the I guess kind of like the Thanksgiving movie too. You know, like family togetherness and all that stuff.
there's the like setup for the Christmas horror type movie where someone who did love the holiday turns his back on Christmas and then it turns on them. That was the premise of like Krampus and things like that.
There's the well, to be fair, this two kind of fit in with all the other ones, but a feel good Christmas movie. You know,
I don't really think that's a story type exactly.
I'm trying.
There's the like ironic gift exchange type story where like for example a man buys his girlfriend with really long beautiful hair a fancy comb, but he has to sell his heirloom pocket watch to
Like,
do
just for
it,
the
and then the girlfriend winds up selling her hair to a wig maker to buy a watch fob for the watch that the guy no longer has.
yeah, the gift of the Magi.
Yeah, that kind. Yeah.
I remember because Robot Chicken did a sketch of that. There's also the I guess Christmas is Hell story, like depicts the craziness of it all.
Yeah, the commercialism and the craziness, like
Mm.
your bad Santas. To some extent, the Jim Carrey Grinch does that a little
The
bit.
what was it? The Jingle All the Way.
Jingle All the Way, Christmas with the Cranks.
I've never seen that.
You've never seen Christmas with the Cranks?
No.
Good, it's really bad. There's the story of like the poor put upon person finding like a found family or finding someone to be charitable to them around the holidays. Like
what would Hogfather count as? That I'm curious actually.
I think that's just a normal like Santa centric story. It just happens to not be a typical Santa Claus.
That also is one too, like Santa, like
Yeah, Santa or like Christmas lore centric story.
Yeah, the Santa Claus, Violent Night,
dozens upon dozens of Christmas specials that it's not even like if we wanted to list all the Christmas specials that were like Santa centric, we would be sitting. I mean, in terms of movies, you've got Polar Express, Santa Claus the movie,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Raskin and Bass, Santa Claus.
yeah, the Rankin and Bass ones, the shoot. Like it's funny because there's so many, and now that I'm thinking about it, I can't think.
Either way, there are plenty of them, and they're tried and true. Like there's, I think
Yeah,
we've had a discussion before, but just because something is cliche doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It's more so how it's
yeah,
used.
no. So some things are common because they make sense.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, it's the whole thing I always say. My mantra is there's no bad idea, just more execution.
Hmm.
So yeah, um, so that does seem to be a simple plot point with Dash into the Snow is obviously like the Scrooge character, or I guess the father here who doesn't like Christmas, and there'll probably be a reason
Yeah,
why.
learning their lesson.
Mm-hmm.
The Christmas comeuppance stories, basically.
Well, that's one of them, I think.
Hmm.
So okay, me.
You could even, I guess, throw in like "It's a Wonderful Life" type stories because a lot of things kind of take the basic premise of "It's a Wonderful Life" as well. Anyway, candy canes.
Do you mind telling me what you're doing in my chimney?
Can you see me?
What's your name?
My name is Nicholas Santa Claus.
What is this?
Oh, the carrots. The missus said I need to eat healthier, so she think this will wean me off the cookies. Hasn't worked so far.
If you're really Santa, tell me what Charlotte wants for Christmas.
She wants a pretend makeup kit and a scooter.
I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
look like the greatest thing ever, but I don't hate it either.
I dig the Santa Claus because I've seen that actor.
I'm pretty sure that's Kevin Hart, but I could be wrong. And thereby extension racist, I'm sure, for getting it wrong. We lost Brainstormer again. I assume technical difficulties. I should sing A Christmas Carol, but honestly, like I said, I think I might be getting sick, and so I'm not going to butcher a Christmas song with my sick voice, because that would not be good. And we're waiting, I suppose, for Brainstormer to come back. Yeah, R.I.P. Brainstormer again. Honestly, I'm going to have to look into how expensive modems are, because this keeps freaking happening. Dragon Turtle, you were so thoroughly wrong that I feel as though I should list a bunch of Christmas songs that are awesome, just to fill the dead air. But I'm also not gonna, because in addition to being possibly getting sick, I also haven't eaten yet today, and so I'm getting very distracted by hungriness. I mean, I like Silver Bells, Maybe It's Cold Outside, All I Want for Christmas Is You, Winter Wonderland, obviously. Let It Snow, again, rather obviously. It's hard to find a Christmas song that I don't actually enjoy. Like, I guess some of the religious ones can sometimes get on my nerves, but even like We Three Kings, I've always enjoyed We Three Kings. Silent Night is fine. Do You Hear What I Hear? I really like that one. So even the majority of the religious ones don't really get that much on my nerves.
All right, I'm back. So I was looking it up. When did I cut off?
Like right after I said I thought it was Kevin Hart, I think.
No, I must have cut off way before then because I did not hear you say that at all.
Okay, so yeah, you must have been gone longer than I thought then. Because
Yeah, okay.
I thought it was I believe I said I think it's Kevin Hart, and then I made a joke about it and I was like, well, if I'm wrong, then I'm sure I'm racist again for mistaking someone else for Kevin Hart, but I'm almost positive it's Kevin Hart.
It's not. I looked it up.
Well then,
You were thinking Kevin Hart was stand-up, didn't you?
yes,
And it's not him.
it sounds a crap ton like him. Who is it actually?
Little Ray Houghton.
Okay, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything, to be fair.
He was the friend to the main character of Get Out. The TSA.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, okay, now I remember him, yep.
I've seen him in a few things. He's not bad. He's good. I do think he's playing pretty well as Santa here.
I mean, it does seem like this was very much a paycheck movie for him, because like it's not that this is bad. It's just that it's not. It feels like a very cheap comedy, kind of, because it is. It seems.
I disagree, but so I found the synopsis for the film before I move on.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because after a traumatic experience, Eddie Garrett, a social worker, no longer believes in the magic of Christmas. After his first experience, wife begins his daughter Charlotte's at work, where a magical adventure begins for them.
Interesting. Anyway, back to the trailer.
Yeah.
So we can finish up and then I can eat.
I'm not even. That's really your fault because you don't eat during the day, man.
I only really ever need to eat once to feel full. And I prefer to wait until after we're done because we start right around the time I would normally be having dinner otherwise.
All right. Let me.
Candy canes.
He's right. See, Dad?
I've never met an 8-year-old girl that did not want to pretend make upset. Man, who are they? It looks like a snowman and an elf and a nutcracker, aka every Tuesday at my house. Got a dad.
Yes.
Oh no! What is going on? Those bad guys are after my naughty and nice list, but I got some associates here. Eddie.
again, this is like harmlessly amusing, but it's not really grabbing me. Like
I
I'm sure it would be amusing, but I'm not like there's no wow factor to it yet.
hmm
Maybe it's because I've watched a lot of like black exploitation parodies and stuff, especially like Tyler Perry movies and stuff. I just I might be burnt out on that as a concept at this point.
I don't think that's what they're trying to do here. Because I've seen a lot. I grew up watching Tyler Perry. For the record, Medea is my favorite of like all of his like the movies.
Yeah, and you and my mom would get along really well then because she also loves Medea. I mean, I like her too, but I mostly enjoy it because my mom enjoys it so much.
I mean, to be fair, it's just like the way she acts is kind of how I want to react to a lot of stupid people.
Yeah, the oh hell no thing.
Um, I'm
I
not really
remember
getting
one
it.
time she was getting robbed and her reaction was just, "Oh hell no, they don't they seriously think they're gonna break into this house? Oh hell no." That was funny. I forget
My
which
favorite
movie that
thing
was.
is when like Medea goes to jail and she finds all these people in her house because her brother's throwing a party. Goes upstairs, grabs a gun, and just starts shooting them down, to scare them and get them out.
Yeah.
I would love to do that at one point. At like anyone tries to fuck with like my house or something.
Which I mean to be fair, you also live in the inner city, so that's probably not a insane reaction to such things.
Okay. Just imagine someone throws a party at your house without your permission.
I assume they would have either my mom's or my brother's permission because I don't get consulted when they decide to do shit usually. Like
Welcome.
they'll bring friends over and whatnot, and I just they'll blare music, as loud as possible. Which I mean to be fair, I also am very loud when I'm doing streams and stuff, so it evens out eventually. But yeah, I don't get consulted as to who does or doesn't come over.
But
Period.
yeah, but rounding back to the trailer, I'm not really getting black exploitation from this. 'Cause I've watched black exploitation stuff, and I'm not really getting that from this. Um,
Okay, well, fair enough. Anyway,
uh,
candy
I,
canes.
I was gonna say I do get that it's not really grabbing per se because there doesn't really seem to be anything creative here.
It seems very cheesy, is the thing. Like it's the very definition of like passable. Like
I was gonna
it's not
say,
bad, it's not offensive, it's not annoying or anything. It's just I will watch this once and never feel the need to watch it again, most likely.
okay, that's fair. I was gonna ask what you meant by cheesy because I don't really mind cheesy.
Like cheesy can be fun, but cheese if you're gonna go for cheese, you have to go like more over the top and zany, and it doesn't seem like they're going quite as like if if they wanted to make it a comedy, they need to earn the funny more than I think they're trying to. I
Mm,
guess is the question. Because
fair.
it takes quite a lot for me to laugh, and like again, it's not that I'm annoyed at this or anything. It's just that it is the very definition of something I will probably throw on in the background as background noise and never watch again.
Okay, again, that's fair. Anyway, let
Mhm.
me
Candy canes.
He's a non-believer. Really? Oh, claustrophobic.
I'm sorry, what?
Claustrophobic, fear of Santa Claus.
That's ludicrous.
I get it. You don't believe, but I have to deliver Christmas gifts tonight.
Dad, we need to help him.
Where are you guys?
We're at Santa Claus, and he sweats glitter, and there's these people, and they aren't actually elves.
Bring my child home.
Okay. I know the joke they were going for, but I'm certain there must actually be a like fear of Santa Claus term, and everyone and their mother knows that claustrophobia is fear of confined spaces or fear of like enclosed spaces.
Claustrophobia. They emphasize claws.
Yeah, I know. I get what they're trying to do, but I'm certain there must actually be a term for fear of Santa Claus that isn't claustrophobia, because claustrophobia is fear of tight spaces.
Oh,
it's the opposite of agoraphobia.
That's weird. I expected to be more. Oh, Santaphobia.
Yeah, which they could have. Again, I get the joke, but the joke, it died. The joke died on its ass. It was not funny.
I don't know why. I expected it to be more.
Yeah, I would have expected maybe like Kringellophobia or something.
Yeah,
like
something more technical. Yes.
I guess somebody just failed to be creative when they were naming it. Or like Eulophobia or something. Or I guess no, that would be fear of like Christmas itself. Which I feel bad for anyone afflicted with that, because that's just it's like people who are allergic to ice cream. At that point, I just feel like the world itself wants you dead. It made you allergic to one of the most joyous things to ever exist.
Anyway,
candy canes.
Why don't you have a white beard?
I dyed it. If I want to look younger, I deserve that. How can these two outfox us? Outrun us? All I want to do is have you start believing again. What you about to witness is a sleigh being pulled by 8 beautiful reindeer.
Yeah, I'm sure this must be funny to someone, but I am not the audience for it.
Alright, so I will admit, when I first watched this like a month ago, I was laughing at this. Now, second time viewing, it's okay. Like, it's nothing to write home about in terms of the trailer.
It feels like it should be accompanied with wah wah music. Most of the jokes, like, and I get intentionally bad, intentionally annoying jokes, and Brainstormer can confirm this because he has been the victim of my puns many times. But
it's not comedy. I will stand by that. Puns are not fucking funny at all.
I mean, sure, but that's what I mean. Like, if they were trying to intentionally be bad jokes, and then you had the straight man character reacting annoyed or exasperated to the bad jokes, that would be one thing. But like, I think what stops it from being funny to me isn't even necessarily the jokes are bad. It's the appointed straight man character is not being allowed to react in an over the top or angry way. I think if he were allowed to react in an over the top angry way, it would it would circle back around and be funny again. Like when Brainstormer reacts to my puns, the angry way he reacts to them is usually more funny than the actual pun. It's the exasperated pain inflicted on him that makes it extra funny.
You realize all of those are piling up into me. When we finally meet, I'm not
I'm
gonna
well
do-
aware I probably won't survive our first meeting, but I will die happily.
I'm
I'm fully aware you're going to beat me within an inch of my life, but such is life. I would rather be beaten to death by a friend than ignored entirely. So if I must be beaten to death in penance for all the puns, I will gladly accept that as the option.
You gotta make things sad, man. That's like one of the saddest things I've heard, and I've heard a lot of sad shit in my life.
Oh, I don't think it's sad. I think it's actually somewhat heartwarming and sentimental.
All right, we got like another 20 seconds. So.
Yep. Candy canes.
Oh, I'm gonna stop in here.
Yes, Dragon Turtle. Yes, I do in fact mean extra punny. And between the two of us, we will convert Brainstormer to the way of the pun. One of us. One of us.
Christmas paired to Bluetooth.
Who do you work for?
Some people think I work for Mother Nature or Father Time. Recently, everybody thinks I work for Beyonce. But no, every married man will understand this. I work for Mrs. Claus.
Okay, that one almost approached being funny, but the delivery was wrong. Like that dialogue in and of itself is funny. It didn't hit because it was delivered too flat. Timing is a key to comedy, folks. So while the actual premise of that last joke worked and was funny, I've heard similar jokes delivered better. So womp 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 womp.
All right. Well, with that, folks, I want to say goodbye. Adios. Aloha. Avidate. Sayonara. Peace. Cheers. And
Happy Yuletide Holly Jolly fucking off to everyone.